Okay, so you are the oddball in your family. You're the one who didn't want to be a doctor, the engineer, or a commerce graduate, who didn't want to go to the old established college or university, the places where your mom or dad may have gone. No, that wasn't good enough for you. You had to be different. You decided to take a gamble, to come somewhere new, to explore other ways of thinking and learning. And it seems you won all the arguments with those trying to persuade you to take a more well-worn path. You came here to Ashoka. And now you're the first hatch out of this amazing new experiment in incubating the best minds of our country. You have much to be congratulated upon, but I'll get to that. But my task today is to exhort you. So let my first exhortation be, stay different. Keep taking the risk of being out of step with the conventional, the obvious, the average. At a moment like this, when the world seems to be teetering between farce and tragedy, it's no time to stick to the familiar. It's the outliers, the one who are not fazed by what the herd are doing, what the mode of the moment is, who go their own way. They are the ones who leave a trace. And that, it seems to me, is also what the world needs right now. Coming here, I was recalling some examples from other fields of the human intellect. Think of a young man born in Erode, down south, Srinivas Ramanujan. He spent his last months scribbling in his notebook, away from the topical problems of the day in his discipline. Most thought he was wasting his time and talent. Yet today, as scholars begin to understand what he was doing, his discoveries are helping to unlock the secrets of the universe and to build the furthest reaches of the internet. Or think of another young man, this one born in 18th century Wales. William Jones decided to study Sanskrit, a language barely known in Europe in his day. He fell in love with the language and went on to make discoveries that opened up India's ancient history and which totally transformed our understanding not just of that past, but of human language itself. To discover and innovate today may take even more resistance and contrariness than in the past, that dark age when we didn't have to measure our self-esteem in likes and retweets. We now carry the world, or some version of it, in our pocket. Global crises, entertainment, love, ideas, nonsense, solutions and disruptions, fixes and upgrades, our well-fingered little black slivers contain instant remedies for every problem, whether it's a fashion niggle or a planetary cataclysm. Availability has become its own urgency. And in the restlessness that breeds, we can forget that Snapchatting and Instagramming are very different from actually listening and seeing. So can we mute some of that noise, burrow down into a field of thought, mull a puzzle, take apart a question? Can we depend less on the machine in our pockets and more on the machine in our heads? The fact is, machines are going to be putting plenty of us out of jobs and careers. And we're going to have to rely much more on our own special capacities, on honing skills that machines can't replicate. This university has trained and tuned that beautiful machine under your hair. And here I do speak with a little envy. But now, as you leave Ashoka to head out into the world, you're going to have to sustain some such space in your own heads. A space from where, if you like, a sanctuary for intellect and free thought, seemingly away from urgency and utility. A space from where might emerge answers to problems of the future, or maybe even questions like Ramanujan's, which the world doesn't yet know how to ask. Let me stress this mental sanctuary of sorts, or better, think of it like keeping alive in your mind the intellectual experience you've had here at Ashoka. It's not a space of retreat. Rather, it's a constant hawk-eyed mode of attention, a capacity for reading closely and forensically, testing out meanings, elisions, silences, whether from words or images. A capacity for listening. Skills such as these, I think, become even more important at a time when we're pummeled with distractions. In fact, the skills I'm pointing to are the foundations of the humanities and the liberal arts. Close reading. The fancy names for it include philology, the study of language and words through the lens of historical change, and paleography, a kind of micro-reading of texts down to actual handwriting to establish authenticity and integrity. Nowadays, these are considered wildly unfashionable, useless, and scholastic. Who wants to study ancient languages or learn the apparently boring arts of editing and producing scholarly editions of texts and letters? Yet think of all those important works you access and reference on the web, works of poetry, philosophy, drama, history. They're all based on editorial choices and scholarship, on deep research, quiet consideration, sound judgment. Consider the field of history today, a battleground of contesting stories where different groups revere their preferred heroes, where fabrication all too often passes as fact. In such times, trying to find out and to tell the truth about the past, about figures deified or vilified, can be a subversive practice. The fact, the archive, the document, the image, the object, or the map, analysis of primary sources can serve to correct claims that are sometimes just ill-informed and refute others that are intentionally false. Work that honors rather than neglects or obscures the historical record can give us also the benefits of self-criticism. And it can turn mythified heroines and heroes into real people, thus enriching the repertoire of examples who might actually inspire us. It can also provide us with new insight into our politics. Take, for instance, the Harvard political theorist Danielle Allen's reading of the founding text of the American Republic, the Declaration of Independence. It's a short and much-read text, and you might think we already know everything we need to know about it. Yet, through scrupulous attention, she discovers new, unheard, unnoticed meanings in the language, and demonstrates that the values of liberty and equality, often posited as competing and requiring trade-offs, that those values were actually co-equal in the minds of the American founders. Such work provides the foundations of the liberal arts, and such work is the bedrock, too, of freedom and of democracy, the basis on which we can hope to test and challenge assertions about what is true and false. So that's my second exhortation. Read deep, listen closely, and know that neither are passive acts. Listening to the unfamiliar, engaging with those from the past whom you cannot comprehend, and with those in the present who irritate and infuriate you. It's the best way to make new discoveries. Exhortation number 3. Embrace science, numbers, data, but don't stand in awe of them. They are your tools, not your masters. There is much that we in the liberal arts have to learn from science. Above all, its conception of truth is open-ended, corrigible, and never quite finished pursuit. But that's no reason to concede everything to science. What place science should have in the life of man and nature is a question to which science or scientists don't have any privileged answer. Debating that question falls squarely in the domain of philosophy, of ethics, and of the humanities. Remember that and argue into the dawn with any advocate of science who tries to tell you otherwise. We tend to assign the future to science and to scientists, to charge them with inventing the next best thing. The liberal arts and humanities, well, okay, they can have the past, the dusty, boring stuff, the arty, time-pass distractions. But that class of 2017 is all wrong. In studying the great works of the past, the classics as well as those forgotten, in analyzing the conundrums of philosophy, in trying to explain the turning points of history, you aren't merely delvers into the past, custodians of tradition. Immersing yourself in traditions of thought and scholarship are ways to sharpen your powers of reason, imagination, skepticism, and judgment, all essential to creating the new in thought. Make it new, Ezra Pound's war cry of modernism. Yet remember, he was himself reinvigorating a phrase from 12th century China associated with a new Confucian scholar. And that's the point. Making it new means having to know the old. Knowledge of tradition enables individual talent to define itself, innovation to occur. So work with scientists as your equal collaborators and partners. They have as much to learn from you as you from them. An exciting field, for instance, of literary criticism today has developed around computing. The Italian scholar Franco Moretti established the Stanford Literary Lab, which through its computational criticism sifts through vast bodies of texts using quantitative analysis, which he argues allows us to understand the crucial values of a given time. Computer software sift for word patterns in, say, thousands of 19th century novels, searching for words like efficiency or earnestness or influence, words that signified core bourgeois values, and so, he tells us, can help us trace the rise and fall of bourgeois culture. Think for a moment what one could do with that, say, with Sanskrit texts, or Tamil ones, or Oriya ones, in order to understand our own past. Think of the perspectives on our history and our present we could gain. And yet, technology is useless for such tasks unless harnessed to deep training and immersion in literature and history. Just as ideas for improving our future can be facile and transient if disconnected from an understanding of our past, whether it's inequality or caste discrimination, religious bigotry, or environmental destruction. Traditions, as you've learned here at Ashoka, are not dull and univocal, and they're not irrelevant to the crises of the present. Rather, traditions are quarrelsome, both within themselves and with each other. What every tradition asks of us is to hear those quarrels, to bring to them our own powers of reasoning and argument, to keep the debate ongoing, to keep it alive. Why do we still read Aristotle or Nagarjuna? Not because Aristotle's answers always convince us, not because Nagarjuna has the final say on basic puzzles of existence and causation, but because they posed questions, identified dilemmas in logic and ethics, politics and aesthetics that have kept us arguing and scratching our head for 2,500 years since. My fourth exhortation, make the distinction, always difficult, between the thoughts and feelings that come most easily to your mind and ideas you can fiercely defend. When I taught students like yourself in the US with the critic and philosopher Leon Wieseltier, one phrase we banned in our class was, well, it's just my opinion. No, fight for what you think. And that means fighting with yourself, with your own opinions and thoughts. Put pressure on them. Put pressure on them until you can justify what you think, until you can give us reasons for what you believe. What separates an opinion from a prejudice, what makes it a belief, are the reasons we're able to give to justify it. And that's a responsibility that falls on you, not only because of the education you've had over these past years. It's a responsibility we all have as citizens of a great democracy, as members of an open society. A responsibility to make the effort and take the time to give our fellow citizens reasons for our views. It's the only hope we can have to persuade them. Which doesn't mean to say that such beliefs, our beliefs, thereby become infallible. They must stay open to further testing, to the possibility that they can be disproved in the light of counter-arguments, new facts, or old facts and values that we may have ignored. I spoke earlier of carrying in our heads something like a space of intellectual sanctuary, a neural map or brain image of something like this beautiful campus of yours, where you can think freely away from the pressures of the world, the urgency of now. But the point of such a space is that it allows us to step out and act in the world. And this brings me to my fifth, and I promise last exhortation. Get engaged if you're not, and stay engaged if you are. Democracy is a great stirring of ideas. Its debates are a whirl of opinions, half-formed thoughts, strongly expressed, prejudices and principles, beliefs and bigotry, values and panicked reactions, all vying for the attention of our individual multitasking minds. Democracy is amenable to, indeed designed for, manipulation, and that's what's turned some of the more fastidious against it. Remember Plato's early warnings, still as powerful as ever. Indeed, going by the recent evidence from Britain, Europe, and the US, and even from our own country, democratic politics may be more open to manipulation than ever. But that's no reason to get cynical about it. Democracy and the sometimes scrappy debate that goes with it is vital because it subjects all authority to scrutiny. Democratic rule requires authority to justify itself by giving reasons, not by resorting to the habits of custom, the claims of the divine, the invocation of greater numbers, or simply the assertion of raw power. Democracy then asks us to make judgments about who should have authority, and it invites challenges to those who claim it, and indeed requires citizens never to entirely trust those who claim authority, but to invigilate them continuously. In a society where political power is built through persuasion, there is work to be done, work of the intellect, of criticism, and of judgment, work to find the facts, to get closer to the truth. Democracy is not a condition, it's a choice, and choices need to be defended, fought for. Remember, even those who hope to manipulate through propaganda are using ideas, are telling stories about the past, present, and future, are appealing to some notion of principle and value. And that gives opportunities to criticize and to refute, to push back. It behoves every Democrat, every one of us, to respect the weight of numbers. That is a basic moral and political obligation of the Democratic Pact. But it does not follow that we must accord the weight of numbers intellectual respect. What the herd thinks, what majorities choose, are not always right. In fact, they're often plain wrong. And so it becomes a democratic obligation, a duty also of the Democratic Pact, to argue against the conformities of belief. When we think about the promise of democracy, when we contemplate its highest ideals, we might feel, as we survey its often dismaying practice today, disheartened and even paralyzed into inaction. And yet we have in our own recent history inspiring reminders of the vitality of democratic debate, of the work and consequence of reasoned argument in public life. Think of our Constitution. It's a magnificent thing. But even more inspiring and important than the document itself, I'd argue, are the remarkable deliberations in the Constituent Assembly that led to its making. 3 years during which the impulses of hope, fear, greed, and idealism were subject to the scrutiny of reason, justification, and often of compromise. The positions adopted were not always right or noble. The choices and decisions reached were often flawed and inconsistent. Fallibility was baked into the process, as it must be in any exercise of the human intellect. But the spirit of public argument and reason, of boldness and sobriety, are a blazing legacy to us. The arguments over what India was and should be was already a declaration of our independence, an affirmation that we existed. The record of those debates, conducted in a moment of crisis, is a thrilling reminder of our capacities for collective deliberation. 3/4 of a century or so on, it's unlikely that there can be any one platform, any one great hall like the wheel of our parliamentary chamber where such deliberations might occur. No, they have to happen today in arenas, physical and virtual, across the land and indeed across the globe. And it is for you to be the instigators, carriers, shapers of those deliberations. Today, we celebrate all that you have given as Ashoka's first graduates to realize the dream of a daring new university. We celebrate your individual achievements during your years here, and we admire your impatience to accomplish still more. University, the French philosopher Pierre Hadot has said, can be a training for a career, or it can be a training to be a human being. I hope above all that your time here will have shown both the immensity of that challenge of becoming human and also how essential it is if we are to sustain the public engagement needed to build a fair and an open society. Of course, training to be a human being is never a completed task. It's something we start each waking day. So this evening, take your ease, laugh, celebrate with your family and friends, and let the work of the future, yours and ours, begin again tomorrow. My congratulations to you, class of 2017, Ashokan pioneers.